became Benny Levy, to start with the recording, is someone who basically tried to convert Sartre to Judaism. He said it's just not a concept, it's just not a movement of people, etc. It was a culture, and he tried to convert Sartre on the basis of what Sartre didn't understand in the Jewish question, or translated as anti-Semite and Jew, was that Judaism itself was a culture, right? And he used this argument with him. And as Bob probably knows much better than me, Sartre was not in great shape during that period, right? And was very easily influenced in a sense. Levy was in charge of his papers, was his secretary, had many debates and arguments with Simone de Beauvoir, as well as with Arlette, too. So this is a kind of thing that needs some clarification, this later part of Sartre's life. And he also, I had many conversations with Claude Lanzmann, the filmmaker who did Shoah, who was a lover of Simone de Beauvoir as well, too. So there are all these kind of cross relationships that are going on during this period. But it's interesting you think of that as his third ethics, that period. But we maybe go back to that later on, if you don't mind. Yeah.
That categorization comes from Sartre, and the transcription of the meeting with the Tomadale team.
Okay.
In 72, it's called. Oh Lord. I'm pretty weak on the titles and dates.
No problem. I can find it.
But that is, he does speak of his three ethics, and speaks of the one that gives a socialist ethics in 70, and he abandons that in 68, 72, and starts to speak of this new third ethics, which Beauvoir and Benny Levy had a big knockdown, drag out fight about the validity of that. I don't want to take time. I could tell you about the letter she wrote me.
Yeah, why don't you? That'd be nice, if you don't mind. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Well, she after the 79 meeting in Silly, I wrote to her, and I think she must have made some dent in her memory, because in the next meeting at Silly in 80, I can't remember. I told her we had come upon, well, I sent her the second ethics, and the typescript that Janson had done at Gallimard in the 60s. She said to me in her letter that Benny Levy just couldn't be trusted on their dialogue, that abuse of an old man type of stuff, and that has led to quite a major debate. The Americans involved are people like Ron Aronson, and Ron Aronson had a wake up of his own Marxism, wrote a book after Marx to announce it, But I'm rambling. Excuse me,
Oh,
Michael.
no, it's
Go ahead.
okay. It's very interesting material for all of us here in many ways, because there was this, as people well known, and I think this is one of the reasons Sartre doesn't, people have asked, why is he out of the institutional practice so much? Why isn't he taught more often? Why has he been, relegated somewhat to the ash can of history in philosophy departments, political theory departments? And I think you're problematizing it very well, that they had this debate after Benny Levy, with Sartre in the middle 70s, especially when he was, basically had to be read to, he had been blind,
Fine. Yeah.
etc. It was not in good shape, and but still kept going on, in terms of trying to be active. And you point out many of the interlocutors, such as Ronald Aronson, after writing very good books about the early
Oh,
Sartre,
yeah.
turned against Sartre because of the Marxism and what they considered an apologia for Stalin in the second volume of the dialect, the critique, right? That, yeah.
Now, Ron has since written in his post-Marxist phase a wonderful book titled "We," which lays out in very solid Sartrean ways and a conception of positive reciprocity. Without the violence, which is what he and Ron Aaron and other Sartreans have.
Probably your friend William McBride, maybe.
No, no, no. Teaches at or taught at Dickinson College. Um, he wrote about violence, peculiar ambiguity of Sartre on the subject of violence was one of his titles.
Huh. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but he's a very prominent.
Not Cumming, right? Not
I beg your pardon?
Robert Denon Cumming?
No, no.
Okay. Yeah.
He was at Columbia and wrote a very good book about Sartre very early on. Please, I think it's best that you take the theme of the talk and
Okay,
go.
yeah, no problem. Okay, yeah, no problem. But thank you for that very much. It's good that people understand that this became extremely complex after this book was out there and studied and activated. And a lot of these debates went on in the United States in particular about the question of violence here and dialectical reason. And whereas in Latin and South America, the violence issue was not so prominent in terms of whether we read or take Sartre seriously in this book. Because this book never made it to philosophy departments, the 1960 critique, much less, of course, the Flaubert study, which was what he considered to be, as you know, he wanted this to be his magnum opus, the culmination of, the merger, if you will, of, Marx and Sartre and existentialism, I guess, would be one way of putting it. Yeah. But no, thank you for that. And the relationship to Levy is very, very important. It's my understanding that Sartre hadn't read Gramsci until the 70s. He never really had a relationship to Antonio Gramsci. He had only discovered Gramsci in the early 70s and was delighted to have found him. Yeah. But I personally think there's still a militant ethics. Just reading through his work, I won't categorize it like you do. I think that the militant ethics really remained until about, 73, 74. And then you began to see some kind of change more, because of the Levy influence and, and the aging, et cetera. He wasn't as, he was no longer really the cafe writer the man traveling, the situational writer at that point. Yeah, to mind, yeah.
If you'd like, Michael, I could take about 10 minutes here or later and tell about the second ethics and
You want to do it now, and then we can move into
why he dropped it.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I mean, it's
Sure,
great.
if you'd like. Okay.
Sure. I think everybody would appreciate it. I'm speaking for myself, but yeah, yeah.
Okay. Well, I at Cerisy in 85, I met Elizabeth Bowman, and we learned about each other's interest in the ethics. And so when that came up later, it was thanks to her that I got it in the mail.
Wow. Okay.
The typescript that had been prepared at Gallimard by Francis Janson. We were friendly with Francis before he died. Francis was one of the early philosophical followers of Sartre. André Gautz was the major later one, and so
Godard film.
I beg your pardon.
He's a philosopher in the Jean-Luc Godard film. Janson. He has a very wonderful conversation on a train with Annie Viminesky about what does life mean. So it's a wonderful scene in the history of French cinema.
With Godard.
Yes, well, Godard directed the film, but Janson is the actor.
Oh yeah.
Himself, the philosophy professor who's trying to, engage Annie Viminesky about the meaning of life. It's a wonderful sequence.
I've been told about that,
Yes.
and I think I've seen it, but I can't remember. Thank you for putting me back onto it.
Yeah.
I'll just lay out very quickly if Stalinism had to be criticized morally, and Sartre took most of his audience at the Gramsci Institute in May of 1964 to agree that that was needed, that the critiques of Stalin were to be based in morality. How would you generate this morality? And he winds up focusing on the notion of need, as in the notion of from each according to his need, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need or hers. That this was not, it was an invention of the French Revolution debates before and during and after. And Marx picks it up, and so instead of talking about communism as some sort of ideal, Sartre shifts in this, adds the centrality to these notes he gives at the Gramsci Institute in May of '64, focusing no longer on desire, as in the case of being and nothingness, but on a need-centered ethic. A need is, as it were, the moral biology side, the moral side of biology. If humans have needs like other species, it has this urgency to be this moral must attached to it of being satisfied. And however, he's presuming Marx and trying to give Marx Marx's notion of communism as the proper satisfaction of the problem of need, where the obligation of all humans to devote themselves to the feeding and the meeting of needs of other humans is taken up as satisfying the structure of moral conduct, which is that whatever is specified morally is given as unconditionally possible. So you've got this notion of need as having to be satisfied by integral humanity. Now, what is that? It's the humanity that's on the other side of need, that is plural, species-wide. It's very close to the notion of need is very close to what Marx speaks of as species being.
Right.
But Sartre and what Sartre adds is this is all shot through with the morality. There's no scientific neutrality, or rather that if you want to be honest and scientific, you have to admit that need is not a neutral experience for humans. And it sets out something of a program or problematizes the human condition by imposing on us the need to satisfy each other's the needs. Anyway, this is by way of what Sartre could contribute as a philosopher to Marx. He gives the requiredness, the mustness, and he accepts wholeheartedly Kant's key observation that if you must, you can. That since we can't be obligated to realize the impossible, if we are obligated, and he looks at the moral universe phenomenologically, it gives us some categories for breaking it down, but he finds among all these types of moral experience that unconditional possibility, the mustness is this given this you can do it, you must do it, means you can do it. Gives us foresight, this ethical foresight to the experience of morality. So the second chapter is devoted to that part of the phenomena. He calls it not the progressive, but the regressive aspect of the phenomenology of need of moral experience finds at the root of all moral obligation this unconditional possibility. Now, we can debate that.
Sure.
Does he prove it or not? Please look it up, think about it, ponder it. But that's his contention.
Right. Just for everybody here, when you mentioned the word regressive, of course, he speaks, as you know, of the progressive regressive method that he takes somewhat from Henri Lefebvre in terms of verticality and horizontal complexity in the book earlier on in Search for a Method, The Questions of Method. But I think you're speaking to more of a phenomenological or Husserlian regress to get to the phenomena of the a priori, or the a priori of the categorical imperative in some ways, right? That, if you can.
That's correct.
Yes. Okay. So just to put it in, a language that I guess is, that this group here, I think somewhat, it's understanding. Yeah, I hope. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to pass now to.
No, I didn't mean to. No, I mean, it's really just because you use the word regressive. I just wanted to make sure everybody was hearing you correctly. No, this is great. I mean, this is fantastic because we haven't really done this in terms of backing up about the question of morality and how he was so convinced about having to have an ethics. I mean, when I first started to read Sartre, I heard about the notebooks, notes from the phony war, right? The early stuff that he had put in notebooks, in a sense. And I had no idea about these levels that you're, articulating tonight, until, just a few years ago that he really set out to do this, and, et cetera. And of course, this relationship to Stalin, and Stalinism, if you will, is throughout this book. When we start getting to organization and then later into terror, it's very much code, I think, in terms of the show trials and what happened in the Soviet Union in the 30s and the 40s. And of course, remember, we're only 4 years after the 20th Congress when he publishes this book. He starts working on it, during this 20th Congress of the Communist Party. And 64, if I remember correctly, too, he won the Lenin Peace Prize. But already you can see there the attitude that he's
and the Nobel Prize too that summer.
Earlier refused.
And refused it anyway.
Right, yeah.
This progressive moment of the investigation of ethics. What do you do about this world that imposes this obligation on us to feed each other and meet each other's needs? That's developed in our book, Betsy's in my book, Sartre's reading Sartre's Second Ethics.
Yes.
And it takes off from the lecture of 1964 in May, and at the intellectual arm of the Italian Communist Party, which was in Rome. It's where he gave that lecture, and he held. Now that lecture draws out and is a summation of his experience with both the Algerian Revolution of 58 to 62 and the Cuban Revolution.
Right.
The moment Sartre learned of this crazy revolutionary in this tiny little island off of Florida, who had made a revolution, hadn't yet called it socialist. Sartre went down there with Sartre and Beauvoir. They had been invited by the editor Revolution newspaper, and and who was sympathetic to Sartre and philosophically, can't remember his name right now. Sorry. Anyway, Sartre went down and had this wonderful discussion about need with Fidel, which is summed up in Sartre's book, Sartre on Cuba, which he didn't encourage to be published.
Right.
He wrote it. It was published. It was translated. I read it in 1960 and got credentialed by my college newspaper, and when interviewed Fidel, and it's from Sartre's year earlier visit that he everything fell into place in the ethics around the notion of need, thanks to his interactions and his conversations with Fidel. Interestingly, at roughly the same venue that a year later was attacked by the Bay of Pigs invasion of the U.S. trained militants on April 17th, 1961.
They met better militants when they tried to get in, though.
They did, and Fidel was a very good summoner of the defense
Right.
of Cuba, and it worked. They threw the Yankees out, and it was quite a moment. But Sartre had contracted with Figaro magazine. Figaro had its weekly magazine, and it's fascinating reading, and it is the very most positive side of Sartre's writings that you'll ever run into. And but I think it was precisely because of that he abandoned it. I don't think he ran into philosophical difficulties in it. I don't think he wanted to renege on the notion of an ethics of integral humanity. Although my dear friend Bill McBride thinks I didn't pay enough attention to the notion of contingency, and that positing any goal of work like integral humanity did violence to Sartre's notion of contingency. We can debate that. I come out less pessimistic than Bill on that topic, but we had a good debate at the Sartre Society a year ago, short, unfortunately, but things are slowing down in the Sartre Society. Tom Flynn, who is a master explicator of Sartre in every respect, he's dead now, but he was in decline at the time of the conference and wasn't able to participate. I think he would have been sympathetic to what I had to say, but I'm sympathetic to what Bill has to say. But my my take on there's nothing in the second ethics that is in conflict with CRD 1 and 2.
Right.
And and there's no, I suppose you could make a philosophical make an argument for its incompatibility with certainly. Well, he decenters his thinking from focus on desire and being in nothingness and consciousness to a different starting points for the understanding of morality, namely need on the one hand, which is now the central motivating factor, moves the machinery in CRD 1 and 2, with praxis as the way to satisfy need. So you've got this notion of praxis, group praxis,
right,
to deal with. And I, observing what he wrote immediately after the Second World War, the contents of Situation 3, he wrote an essay on the aftermath of the war, in which he I think understood what I called at our last discussion the epic of nuclear terror.
right.
And I think we're still under it. The vulnerability to nuclear terror. It's a term of my former friend Joel Covell, and he wrote a book. Joel wrote a good book on it called "Against the State of Nuclear Terror," meaning both a play on where the U.S. as the state of nuclear terror, originator of it, and Sartre takes that up in this essay he wrote in 1945. When it was known that, well, it was known both that the hydrogen bomb was possible, much tougher and bigger and much more devastating than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. But it was also believed at that time that this nuclear chain of reaction could get out of hand and blow up the atmosphere, for example. That there would be an explosive, what we now call nuclear winter, but it was because Oppenheimer was able to show that that was not a legitimate fear that they got away with. They satisfied the omnicidal fear that was abroad in the world by an nuclear illiterate public. Why couldn't this just blow everything up? That was satisfied scientifically. Anyway, I'll now end this little discussion by saying that Well, I'd really like to read a little passage from this essay that he wrote called "The End of the War." It was right after this was this was the year of 45, right after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. He writes, "The world is simplified. Two giants stand alone and are not well disposed to one another. But it will be some time before this war reveals its true face." I think that's about now, actually. "Its last moments serve to remind us of human frailty. So we are happy that it is ending, but not the way it is ending." A good number of Europeans would have preferred Japan to be invaded, crushed by naval bombardment. But the little bomb that can kill 100,000 at a stroke and which tomorrow will kill 2 million, that was known, that risk of the H bomb, that was known, brings us up suddenly to our responsibilities. This is, of course, what the sort of thing that reached me when I read this in 56 and as a college freshman. The next time the earth could be blown up, that, as I said, that was a working fear in 45. The next time the earth could be blown up, that absurd end would leave forever in suspense the problems that have been our concern for over 10,000 years. Nowadays, we would think of environmental omnicide, but here are the problems that occurred to him in 45. One, no one would ever know whether humanity could have overcome racial hatred. We'd all be dead. Or two, whether it would have found a solution to class struggles. When one thinks of it, everything seems futile. And yet humanity had one day to come into possession of its death. This is an important idea. This is the idea of species suicide.
Right.
He's the first to articulate that idea that I know of. There's another thinker who inserted himself in this nuclear age debate. He was Hannah Arendt's first husband. Can't remember his name.
Gunther Anders.
Who?
Gunther Anders.
Gunther Anders. Yeah, it means
yeah.
Gunther Other.
Other.
He thought of himself as
right,
the
exactly.
other.
The very brilliant man.
Well, that's right. And he accused Sartre of stealing from him.
Yes, he did. Yes, I remember.
Because this discussion
right.
of the dawn of the nuclear age, because Sartre saw it and labeled it, and we are still in it, in my opinion. You see this story, the end of the war. Anyway, I'll just finish this paragraph. Whether it would have found a solution to the class struggles. When one thinks of it, everything seems futile, and yet humanity had one day to come into possession of its death. And that's what's new about the nuclear era, omnicide. the species ending itself. Up until now, it had led a life that came to it from who knows where. And since it lacked the means to commit suicide, this is the pre-1945, pre-nuclear era, it didn't even have the power to reject self-inflicted death.
Right.
Now, that sentence was written in 45. I want to just remark that today we must choose between a suicidal war and rejecting peaceful, rejecting species suicide. Now, I think we've tolerated this, living under this threat of our own immolation, self-abolition, since 45. That's quite a while. It's worn into us and internalized in various ways that Joel captures in his notion of nuclear terror. And here's the way Sartre finishes this essay. As it dies, the war leaves man naked and without illusions. He has abandoned, the paragraph begins, God is dead. The question is, what about man? Is man dead?
Right.
And as it does, the war leaves man behind, naked and without illusions. He is abandoned now to his own devices, having at last understood that he has only himself to rely on. This is the only good piece of news that Thin is alluding to an earlier metaphor of the end of the war. That thin, ceremonious burst of gunfire brought us the other afternoon in Paris. There was a signal to the end of the war. Meaning, okay, you want to avoid another one? Start now. Take responsibility for history. Get with prolonging the human era, an experiment, instead of ending it. And so I think that the existential question of humanity was part of what existentialism was about at its birth. And it's still a challenge to us to take responsibility for our history collectively, globally, and put a stop to this. It's possible. And that's why I think Sartre is so forgotten, avoided, eschewed. Philosophical arguments up the kazoo against him. It's perfectly okay to ignore this guy. His philosophy asks us to take responsibility for our history.
Yeah,
That's
and we're
quite a job.
Yeah, we're terrified of our freedom.
That's right.
Ultimately, we're really, I mean, really the real point of all of this is the terror that freedom brings with it. We use this word like the terror. We speak of state terrorism. We talk of everyday terrorism in everyday life. But the initial terror is the freedom that Sartre, is always privileging in the moment. The freedom to think, the freedom to be responsible. Because if God is dead, it falls, as you said, on the human. Yeah. Ingmar Bergman once realized, after being a very spiritual person for many years, in the 70s, he said he lost God and he became human. He said this publicly. Yeah, very interesting. The great Wild Strawberries, The Seventh Seal, all these films, very, very dark, Scandinavian darkness, if you will, at its most. And, a great filmmaker and a great, spiritual adventure in a sense, but ultimately said, I finally became human. And Sartre, the same thing. If God is dead, the enormous burden is now on our shoulders, the responsibility, which in a way is a very Nietzschean thing as well, you know, pulling it out. And in some ways, why I think Sartre found Heidegger, the later Heidegger, in 61, 62, when he went to visit him, very mystical. You know, he said he had kind of drifted into this mystical thing, you know, the poetic. I mean, I'm not so sure that's the best description, but this is how he found him. I know he reported this to, you know, to Simone de Beauvoir when she asked him how was the visit. And yeah. Yeah, I mean, these are great points. Just going back, you know, of course, Marx says we cannot speak of freedom until the realm of necessity is passed through. And this is, again, another starting point that Sartre takes up, that you don't see in the French psychoanalysis, where desire, you know, Hegelian desire, and, you know, vis-a-vis Lacan, you know, taken from Kojève, is privilege rather than need. And then, of course, you have these societies of abundance, right? That George Bataille and others pick up on. So the whole notion of scarcity has been displaced too. And people don't want to face this. This is scarcity that's going on in Palestine. You know, it's not only genocidal, it's a scarcity issue. It's an issue of need, right? I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, on this basis. And going back to the nuclear, you know, threat that you mentioned, our problem is human beings are no longer in control of the nuclear clock. It'll be AI. And AI may be prone, as we learned when we asked ChatGPT-3 and 4 difficult questions, it might not be able to answer it. Somehow a correlation might miss in terms of the mathematics. So it might not be just the, you know, omnicide, but, you know, machine omnicide ultimately that does it, thinking machines that put us in this mess. So it's even scarier than when you're, you know, in 56 reading this paper as a freshman in college. You know, I think it's much more, you know, terrible in the sense, you know, and yeah, and the fight has to go on. And you see this too, I think, again, you know, what we learned from the Democratic Convention is they're much better with Hollywood. You know, that's what we learned this week politically, right? We didn't learn anything about a platform or what they stand for. We got a lot of rhetoric, a lot of, you know, extremely well-dressed women, right? From Michelle Obama to AOC, you know, of course, AOC wears red, right? Michelle Obama's dressed in black, you know, et cetera. And the projections are out there. So we live in this now, this constant spectacle too, which forces us not to think about need. You know, it's all about desire and the fetish at this point. So these are great points, Bob. I really thank you for that very good intervention. And if anyone has any questions for Bob, I thought he really opened up some, you know, of the more prescient themes that this book raises and where Sartre was. And again, to my mind, you know, the ethical conscience of maybe the 20th century in many ways, Sartre himself. And this is why it's worthy of thinking about this, you know, in terms of the ethical, you know, and speaking of Francois Janson, I just want to mention, there was something called the Janson Network. This was running guns to Algeria, by the way. These were not intellectuals that sat around the university and complained about, you know, curriculum changes or something like that. These were men of the world. I mean, really, and involved in all these kind of moments. So I want you to realize, and he wrote the book on the morality. He started this in Sartre in terms of the first interlocutor in France about this. So really interesting figure, and where the Camus debate began in Temps Moderne. Yeah. So go ahead, Bob, please. I'm sorry.
Well, just to articulate that point a little bit more.
Sure.
The very first writing that counts, that looks like what it would have been, what a Sartrean existentialist ethics would look like, was done by Simone de Beauvoir during the occupation in her
Ethics of Ambiguity.
Ethics of Ambiguity. There was even a book before that written completely during the Pyrrhus Cineas
Right.
was by her. The second writer of an ethics was Janson, who latched onto the second ethics, and the third writer, but he wrote a book in 47 that called The Problem of Ethics in Sartre, which I translated, showing how each of the pre-Being and Nothingness books was part of a laying the groundwork for an ethics, and Sartre tried to do that. He tried to. The Notebook for an Ethics is a failed attempt at an ethics in the context of Being and Nothingness, and then he just said, "I have to change the context." So there's a family resemblance between Being and Nothingness and CRD, but it's very, very different conceptual
Right.
ambience. The third writer in ethics is 1955, Gortz's big book on ethics, based on Being and Nothingness, but also moving beyond it in a Marxist direction. So those are the three inaugural efforts at an ethics, to which Sartre contributed his ethics of 64, and then his third ethics, less than a revolutionary socialist ethics. Simone de Beauvoir was very upset by what she thought of as a sort of gooey, smarmy, liberal ethics of the Hope Now interviews, which she blamed on
How do
Benny
you
Levy.
feel about that? I mean, I have my thoughts. How do you feel? How do you
Well,
that problematic, if you will?
I don't think it's worth debating, because the second ethics is so perfectly aligned with his established work in CRD. It's so dependent on CRD that it. I think he wanted to be thought of as the philosopher of the method of the dialectical method, and I think he has now. The last statement, philosophical statement in the Flaubert, is basically giving the history of the Black humanism of his own era, this willingness to throw humanity into itself into the war frame. Better read than dead is what we are living under still, which was Ronald Reagan's message to us. Better dead than red, I should say.
Yes.
Death instinct.
Like Ronald Reagan in 1940 when he was a child, and anyway,
right
before the.
Well, he was a political genius, and he stared down the 82 demonstration and made hay out of it.
Yes.
Nuclear war must never be fought and can never be won. can never be won and should never be thought. He had a conversation at that time. I was in the movement to keep the Newport out of New York Harbor, and it was withdrawn after Koch had approved of it.
Right.
But the Reagan's defense secretary wanted a 600-ship navy with nuclear cruisers placed in all the ports, including New York City,
Yes.
making it a military objective.
Right.
That's deep cynicism.
Yeah. Yeah.
Putting 20 million people at risk.
Yeah. General Jack Ripper once again, huh?
Yeah. Oh, but if you think about that enough, you see how this guy was manipulating us and getting us to love the weapons that he thought would be protecting us. On the contrary, they made us targets, and we're part of their threat. We're so willing to die for capitalism that he can use us in threats to the Soviets.
Right, right.
Very sick proposition when you think about humanity itself and the end of history being threatened by a U.S. president. It's shameful.
Well, their end of history, as you well know, ended up being the 1991 Francis Fukuyama's end of history, and Western capitalist triumphalism. Unfortunately, that was their end of history. You know, even though, as we all know, the premise of capitalism is really built on death to begin with, the death drive itself. You know, it cannot escape that. That's what the system is built on. So, yeah, it's very.
Freud did go to the point of acknowledging that there is a death instinct.
Yes.
And I think it's better analyzed by Sartre's notion of dark humanity. Humanity is shit in the Flaubert, where he thinks that argues that Flaubert's art for art's sake is just trashing humanity. It's an anti-humanist recrudescence of deifying art at the expense of humanity.
It's interesting because, you know, a lot of the postmodernists, and this is not discussed anymore, but probably was discussed when you were still teaching, a lot of the postmodernists, postmodernity, Madame Bovary and Sentimental Education was the beginning of the postmodernist novel, right, in some ways, which is kind of interesting too, when you bring that up. And interesting that he would choose this author too, to my mind, you know, because Flaubert was not an engagé, right, as we know, you know, in a sense. You know, you would think Sartre would want to maybe choose someone else, like his, you know, friend Louis Aragon, right, if you will, or you know, yeah. So, yeah.
Sentimental Education, Education Sentimentale of Flaubert, shows this young Flaubert hanging out with the revolutionaries, but by no means embracing their hope of a human society.
Right. And just to go back to what you were saying, another thing about his interviews, one of the later interviews of Sartre, I think in the 70s, he's still, you know, very, very lucid. I think it's the middle 70s. He's asked by the interviewer that is there still hope? And he says, there's always hope. And then he said, and they said, well, do you believe in the Pascalian wager? He said, not Pascal's wager, but the wager in this case is on man. right? He always would emphasize that. That's where the hope was in
Well, he
humanity.
never gave that up. He never,
Never gave that
and
up.
that's what he leaves to us.
I think so too. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, this is really part of the legacy. Yeah. And I mean, I follow, I mean, and have taught, many, many years, the Foucaults, the Derridas, the whole post-structuralist so-called, moment in France, et cetera. I know Althusser pretty well, but I've always found they really have something lacking in that regard, right? In so many ways, that there really wasn't really an underneath it all, this really hope in humanity, or that the wager was really on us, right? In a way, this was always my feel. What I came away with. It may be age, it may be who I am, my personal projection.
My guess, and I haven't got any textual backup for this, but my guess is that when Johnson escalated the war and made clear that all the resources in Vietnam would be used to defeat this possible uprising, I think Sartre saw that the fear would dominate, and then he devoted the Flaubert to backing that up. I think he was disappointed that there was no revolution in order to vindicate integral humanity as goal, and this book he'd written based around the hope for that, and the way to do it was gonna just show how the human wave of possibility of that era. All of Africa had gone independent. Algeria was by no means the only third world anti-colonialist revolution. And then when Fidel came along in '59 with this amazing victory in Cuba, he thought this was going to be the revolution, and I think he wrote the second ethics with that in mind, and it wasn't, and it would have made him look silly and idealistic to proceed with publishing it. All the internal notes indicate he's ready to publish this. He hand edits Chanson's typescript and in 63, 2, 3, 4. But then when the Imperium makes clear that it's going to oppose Third World War revolutions, I think he was before his time. 68, he was called in to speak to the students, but I don't think his heart was in it. I think if there had been an uprising in India, Pakistan in the early 60s, it might have made a difference, but this global vision was just, forget it. It's not going to happen. And I think he withdrew that's my, as I say, that's my speculation.
No, it's interesting, of course. At the same time, he visits Andreas Baader in jail, he acted in good faith. At the same time, he was very connected, as you know, to most of the students, activists, if you will, some of whom were the real deal. Others, went the other way, like Bernard-Henri Lévy and others, of that ilk, the nouveau philosophes, who started out well, but, people forget that Bernard-Henri Lévy wrote for Temps Moderne on Algerian torture. He was published in Temps Moderne many years ago. It's a very different figure now, but I guess that's what happens when you have a rubber plantation family, that's a colonizer. It comes back to bite you in some ways. Yeah.
I've been through a debate on this with Ron and the other person whose name I can't recall in New Orleans back in the 80s. I think he was not in favor of the Baader-Meinhof type of violence. It was single. When you can't have. The reason he helped Pontecorvo with his film on the uprisings in Algeria was that he saw the popular countrywide approval of these individual terrorist murders of police and the like, and even the blowing up of young people's cafes. He was inclined not to cancel these authentic revolutions of Ali Lapointe in the film.
Right.
And but that premised a global uprising, and there was no such thing on the books until '68, and on the agenda, and all through that year, that global uprising was on the agenda. But again, the revolution, the repression in Chicago was pretty definite, and all uprisings since have been treated pretty badly by the ruling class, and we're in the depths of the catatonic state of nuclear terror, I think, and it's I haven't thought enough about that to make an argument, but I'm convinced that we're cowed and zombified, and our agency has been defeated. Our agency has been diminished. Collective agency. I'm a creature of the '60s, and I know what that felt like. And
you, me, and about 3 or 4 other people.
Right.
Right. I'm a little younger, but yeah, trying in my way. And yeah, and Beryl looks terrific, but she knows what went down. Phil himself was out there on the West Coast dealing, and in Latin America too. So we have people, Christine, who is around. Leslie has a background here with communists in Canada, and yeah, so it's being recorded, Leslie. It's okay. We're not afraid of the police, especially the thought police. So, right. So,
is this course going to go on?
yes, we're gonna probably go into late October. Yeah, it looks like.
Wonderful,
Finish the
wonderful.
book, and I was going to do some of the things we did today. And thank you so much for this, conceptual background and your own experience with this. And you're a ringer, in the class. It's great. As they say in boxing, the ringer is here, or in sports. So yeah, no, really appreciate it. I was going to go somewhat later, and I really hope you're there into the Camus, the controversy over the rebel and the Janson response and Sartre's moment against that. Also, the relationship of, because I read this book as Sartre's contribution ultimately to elements for a new way of historicity, of doing history, differently. And it's a very futural book in a way. It's a book that's written for posterity. It's not, just written in the moment or whatever. It's not only responding to the situations of that time. So yeah, we're going to go on. We're only in the section on the pledge and the statutory group, and this is one of the reasons we went back to read what Alice Cherky calls the anti-preface to the Wretched of the Earth of Sartre and his relationship to Fanon. And then, of course, some people reviewed the Battle of Algiers, the great Pontecorvo film, as an illustration, if you will, of Fanon's meditation on violence. And we've been talking about that. So then we're going to go on to organization next, and then we'll take in, the rest of the book, the institution, the place of history, class struggle, all these things, because a lot of people here come out of obviously a left tradition, or we wouldn't be here. And, trying to clarify and sharpen up for the future. And now that we have the hope of the Democrat, I'm just kidding, of course, but the hope of the Democratic Party going forward, as Michelle Obama in her Sartrean moment, being and doing is important, right? So, yeah, as she said last night or whenever it was, yeah. So anyway, I personally, I share in some ways with a recent skepticism the value of some of the younger people today. I see this generation kind of coming up. They're a bit, not educated enough. I mean, the educational system. I mean, if you're a freshman in '56, I'm 67. So anyway, it's a very different educational system at work in a very different world at that time. But what if we can get people like the people that are internal, such as the AOCs, which is problematic, but at the same time, there seems to be a groundswell of youth energy, right? A different kind of energy than we had in the 90s, or that we had around even Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter, some of these movements, and maybe the best energy since the Seattle World Trade demonstrations before 9/11. So I'm optimistic about that spirit, if you will, in the Hegelian sense of Geist or Zeitgeist, if you will. On the other hand, I'm someone that thinks, praxis without theory is blind, and vice versa too. So, you have to always have the intellectual. Not that I'm for an intellectual vanguard only. I don't really believe in that either, because, I always love this piece. Josh knows this, of, the Shogun and Will Adams teaching him geometry to the Shogun. It's a beautiful piece in Foucault about how educated people are in the real, quote, real world outside the world of ideas, if you will, or the academics. So that's another reason to read, reread, rethink Sartre, etc. I mean, again, and I'm kind of interested in, why, the cause of the people was kind of a Maoist organ, in some ways. He was really into that for a short period, obviously, that he started Libération with Sergei July. These are really moments because he really believed in revolutionary upsurge, if you will. And to me, that's the risk today. It's either, there's no such thing as reformism. We'll talk about this, to use Gortz's words, revolutionary reformism is important, right? Medicare for all, or healthcare for all, good health care is a revolutionary reform. Yes, guaranteed income may be a revolutionary reform. It's not enough, but maybe that's what we can, throw our hopes in. And I agree with you about the nuclear threat. These people are crazy. I mean, what's going on right now, and I'm very, I mean, I share the same concern, in a way. But I don't want that to distract us from the ground game, if you will, as they say in football or whatever in sports. You need to be in the game too and understand the everydayness here too as well. But yes, that threat is always there, and And speaking of, you bring up someone who's really sorely missed, and I knew him not as well as you did, but he's a very good friend of my friend John Clark in New Orleans, the dialectical social ecologist. And Joel Covell is really a major player out there, very undervalued towards the end of his life by the left in many ways. He had his people, but very undervalued. The Enemy of Nature is a great book, right? But going back to this question of need and desire, The Age of Desire was an excellent Sartrean approach to psychoanalysis, and therapy. And he really had great results too. And people forget, Joel was a labor activist too. He organized. He went on strike lines, et cetera. Yeah. So, anyway, yeah. But this is really great in terms of, kind of laying out, the complexity of Sartre's life, his choices, the ethics in a way. I think Being in Nothingness, the way I read it initially, since I really came much out of Heidegger, it was a way of filling in the Mitsein after he read Being in Time, that the being with was completely neglected by Heidegger, as we know, in 27, and Sartre in 43, the section on concrete relations with others, very, very important, to the existentialist moment. And I see a lot of that still happening here in his notion of individual praxis, which he's always trying to link to collective praxis. And he retains a lot of these concepts in a different way. It's kind of a new language, in this turn, if you will, or what Iris Murdoch, what did she call it? The radical conversion, or the romantic rationalist, right, in a sense. Yeah. So yeah. I don't know. Anybody else? Any question? I mean, I really I think we owe Bob applause or a big thank you for taking us through this internal journey, if you will, in his own book. And I recommend the book. I've read it, and it's available. I think Steve put it in the chat. Now, if you're poor, you can go to the Russians. You can go to get it in PDF. But other than that, yeah. So Jamie has a question for you in the chat. Yeah. Bob, yeah.
Oh,
he has a
what
question
should I
for
do?
you in the chat. This is technology at work.
It's nothing important, really.
Yeah.
Right.
What's
Mainly
your
a thank
question,
you.
Jamie? You want to say? Yeah.
Mainly to say thank you. Thank you so much for these remarks.
Okay.
But also, I'll read it out.
Read it out, please. Yeah.
My only question would be, can Sartre's ethics, quote unquote, as of this book, the CDR, possibly be encapsulated in any brief way? I don't think so. I think the briefest encapsulation is the CDR itself. There are just no shortcuts that can be sort of meaningfully articulated other than to sit through every moment of living out our freedom. Nothing saves us from doing that work. That's all. Thanks again.
That's great. Yeah.
You will want to read our attempt at conveying the essence of the second ethics, because it does give criteria for evaluating revolutionary policies and undertakings, and that's important. How do we get from here to there? We have to know where we're going, and he answers that question. But then the question becomes, as it was with Trotsky's dialogue with John Dewey. What are the means? You have to look at each means and test it against the end, which is the summation of the means. And if the means don't also reflect the end, they can divert the revolutionary process. And so integral humanity is something of a criterion that is developed quite nicely in the second ethics, and which I have used in order to show how Sartre would not, why he did not approve of the violence in the case of the Baader Meinhof gang.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah. Anybody else? Any questions? I mean, we can, we can move back to Fanon and Sarge. I mean, I think one thing that you brought up tonight is appropriate for where we are in the reading. We've been discussing the pledge and the statutory group, and maybe in a sense, this notion of freedom and responsibility within the pledge, in the group. And the group praxis is a kind of nice, re-entry, if you will, into the text. But please.
Well, the pledge is the stage at which humanity itself becomes is brought onto the stage and considered an end. It's the pledge is after the insurrectional victory, and is against the beginning of the serialization of the fusing group, and we must be brothers to each other, is pertinent only when you've won, and now you have each other in a milieu of scarcity, and you have to overcome that. Yes, the theory of groups is crucial, but you have to have the ethics to know where it heads.
Okay, interesting, good, yeah, interesting. Yeah, the vocabulary that he uses pledge in terms of an enforcement of rights, that you have rights in the group. This is another way of the pledge for him too. Yeah.
But that's, again, rights are not fusion.
Right.
Fusion is an internalization, an empathy, a feeling of the other's feeling.
Right.
And rights are rights. Rights talk is already serialized. And anyway, I don't. We could go into all sorts of details. I'm not sure this is the right moment for it.
Okay.
But that's your call, Michael.
No, whatever you like. I mean, I'm fine with discussing the pledge vis-a-vis, I mean, I think the movement to the statutory group, in a sense, that Sartre, again, is trying to avoid the seriality, ultimately, here in terms of the new fused group, to get outside, if you will, of serial thinking, right, and serial practice. Ultimately, and that this is the formation, if you will, of the revolutionary praxis, and that there's something about the pledge there that wants something different. Well,
the common individual is aimed at humanity, meeting humanity's needs, and is ready to organize to that end.
Right.
And there's a lot in there that speaks to various needs of the revolutionary group. And but I don't know where you are in your class, whether we're overtime or
No,
where we.
we stay, we go overtime, unfortunately or unfortunately. I have a bad reputation as being the Fidel Castro of this stuff. We've known to go 4 or 5 hours sometimes. So I can keep spinning, if you will, but it's you know, I don't know how coherent it would be. Anyway, it gets rough in the Sierra Madre sometimes with concepts. But yeah, people forget this. Fidel was 6 years in the hills before they took Havana.
That's right.
Many defeats. You know, this is always, you know, when Marx was asked by Paul Lafarge, what is the meaning of life? He just said one word: struggle. Right? That was the
Right, you
answer he
are.
gave to his son-in-law. So yeah. Anyway, yeah. You know, last week we did speak about violence, that may be behind violence, that violence is everywhere, you know, and you know, in some ways, this is in the old Greek language we were talking about. We had someone who's not joining us tonight that knows ancient Greek very well. You know, the word pedagogia, you know, in Greek does have a terroristic, violent aspect to it, the teaching, you know, the transmission of knowledge, etc. And we talked a little bit about that last week, and also that behind violence is probably just the brutality of existence in many ways. Sebastian, who's at the top here of my screen, at least with the headphones on, you know, we was speaking about Leviathan, that this is a kind of response to Leviathan in some ways, in which, you know, there's Hobbes, you know, defines the humanity as short, brutish, and nasty, or patriarchal society, if you will. So we did talk about that last week, and of course we've been reading the preface again, Fanon, because I think it's very, very prescient. You know, Fanon is now you know, in the mix because of the question of Palestine. I don't think he really ever went out of favor in, you know, post-colonial discourse, probably misused, but anyway, we went over this section a little bit, and I thought, you know, maybe for the rest of the session, there's several things in here that Sartre, obviously in his preface, you know, is you know, in some ways really understanding this, but I think his conclusion supports your point about integral humanity. And if I can read for that, because I think that strengthens where you're going, if you will, you know, and this may be his that. He says, will we recover? This is at the end of the preface to the Wretched of the Earth. Violence, like Achilles' spear, can heal the wounds it has inflicted. Today we are enchained, humiliated, sick with fear, at our lowest ebb. Fortunately for us, this is still not enough for the colonialist aristocracy. It cannot accomplish its rearguard mission in Algeria until it is first finished colonizing the French. Every day we shrink back from the fight, but rest assured, it will be inevitable. The killers, they need it. They will swoop down on us and lash out haphazardly. The time for illusionists and wizardry is over. Either you fight or rot in the camps. This is the last stage of the dialectic you condemn this war, but you don't yet dare declare your support for the Algerian fighters. Have no fear, you can count on the colonists and mercenaries to help you make up your mind. Perhaps, then, with your back to the wall, you will finally unleash this new violence aroused in you by old rehashed crimes. But, as they say, this is another story, the history of man. The time is coming, I am convinced, that we should join the ranks of those who are making it. And that's the concluding paragraph of the preface, right? After he begins, you know, with very, very strong language earlier about, you know, the war, you know, in Algeria, but at the same time, you know, Fanon's book about how does the colonized see, right? How do they experience the colonists? So I don't know. I mean, this seems to be, again, a nice a starting point to go back into this. You know, I never considered Sartre an advocate of violence for the sake of violence, right? Or never thought of it this way. This was never, stupidly thrown out there, or like a crazy leftist, either armed struggle or not, right? Or go home. But yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sartre, in the second ethics, makes it clear that in every case, violence is a revolutionary pause.
Yeah.
You have to deal around it. You have to avoid its consequences, and you have to. It's a pause that you have to allow for in the revolutionary process.
Right. So, I mean, my question, I mean, and I don't know if this is really answerable, but it's a kind of new problematization. Fanon used to say, I would pay, a full salary to listen to Sartre speak and have conversations with him, but ultimately I don't trust him. And, I guess the issue here is that Fanon, having, been someone that fought alongside the FLN, right? He was injecting, methamphetamines to keep soldiers awake for long periods of time. He obviously was on the ground for many times in the midst of the fight. Came from Martinique, had all the clinical evidence and everything. I mean, is there something to be said here that somehow Fanon's distrust is still about, if you will, for lack of a better term, a kind of bourgeoisification that still remained, a kind of Kantian moment of universal peace, of a pax, a perpetual pax that needs to always be achieved, and that Fanon really didn't have any truck with that, and that's one of the reasons he couldn't trust Sartre fully. Just a question I have, in a way, I mean, yeah.
I'm going to have to beg off on an honest and full answer.
Yeah.
I don't know the issue well enough.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it seems to me, there's a great moment in the Black Power struggles where Malcolm X told Sam Cooke, we both grew up with Sam Cooke and, et cetera, and Malcolm X, and he said, how come Bob Dylan is more of a brother than you are? All you do is sing about love songs, in a sense, right? So that Bob Dylan, who's not Black, is speaking for that cause, and he reprimands Sam Cooke for not doing it, and this is where a change's going to come, is written, right, at that moment. So I guess my questions are always, is there still another layer of masks, right, if you will, a kind of unmasking, a kind of, again, phenomenological destruction that's necessary to have that kind of lived experience that a Fanon has, versus that of, people that are, exceptional philosophers and part of a much more, if you will, sophisticated mind, if you will, in terms of philosophy, but still may not get fully to the point about violence or what it is. And is the notion of violence, in revolutionary struggles, as the Panthers used to say, it's always counter violence because the violence has been done, right? Violence takes many forms, right? And and I guess what most people are always against is the armed violence. As you mentioned, the bombing of the European quarter in the movie The Battle of Algiers that actually happened. I mean, is it this problematized by Ben Hidi in the film when he says, "You have your B-52s, we have our baskets of bombs." Right, which is it. I mean, I just think these are very interesting questions as we go forward with the, the Palestinian question once again, the question of many places in the, Sudan, how Africa is still treated, et cetera. We haven't really, gone so forward here, right, in many ways. So, yeah. So I'm just just throwing this out as things to, maybe chew on or whatever. But again, this question that the left has traditionally really avoided, it actually produces, in my opinion, the avoidance of the question of violence produces a kind of left liberalism. It opens up the ways of a left liberalism without keeping people within the dialectical, negations that are necessary. And what would that mean in terms of new dialectical relations? I mean, I'm not a fan of Andreas Baader either. I mean, in some ways, but I don't think he was the worst character on earth either, in a way. I mean, just like, an actor here in Quebec who was here during the 70s in Canada, Jacques Mesrine, who basically was a bank robber and, who ended up in Paris, feeding money to militant groups, in the late 70s after being a major bank robber. So, Lenin's admiration for Stalin, early on, because the guy could rob banks, so I don't know, I'm throwing out a lot of ideas here, but again, can we read Fanon through the Sartrean eyes, or should we just read Fanon and then go back to Sartre and say, this is maybe what he's missing here in terms of, the colonial other? That's kind of my question. Yeah, in a way, yeah. So, yeah. I'm not only posing it, I mean, it's for the group. I mean, to kind of think through, etc. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Yeah, Stiegler robbed banks too. That's correct. Bernard Stiegler was yeah, he was running a jazz club. Another element of Sartre, very under theorized, the relationship to 52nd Street in New York. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, I think this is a very interesting question, especially in the, because the book is subtitled The Theory of the Practical Ensemble, right? In a way. And it is a book oriented, if you will, towards Kant's second critique, right? The great saying that Hegel had of Kant's, the French Revolution was the second critique put into practice. So, maybe Sartre is, picking up on that too, that this is a revolutionary handbook. And I mentioned when we first started this that, many Latin America and militant groups read this as a revolutionary handbook. That this was read very actively, Nicaragua, Colombia, other places throughout Latin America as a revolutionary handbook. And, so I think this is also important too. Yeah. And do we always find ourselves in this practico inert because we won't face that question? That's another big thing to me too. Do we face that? Here we are, as we all know, Chicago Convention 1968, here we are 2024, and we're basically looking at a fashion show, a spectacle brought to you by design, et cetera, without any substance of issues, right, et cetera, except that we're against Donald Trump. This is about the level of the politics at this point. So again, what has happened too? How has this book not been read? How has it not been practiced? What is in there again to, elevate this not only revolutionary consciousness, but action in a sense? And what is that role here? I mean, yeah. I mean, I didn't like the break. You were around, Bob, and some other people here, the break in SDS into the weather people, right? This was not healthy, right? What happened, and yeah. So we know this, but in retrospect. But on the other hand, yeah, where are we, right? In a sense, yeah. Because I'm not a pacifist by nature. I mean, I'm not, yeah. And I don't think Sartre was either. There's too much violence in the writing to be, just to think only, yeah. But
I think there was a liberation of the idea of humanity itself as agent in
Okay.
68.
Okay.
The zigzagging uprisings of that year, taken as a whole, seem to hint at the possibility of the entire human group being an agent. That idea is already in the Rome lecture of 64, May 64. But as I say, he doesn't elaborate. He goes into the Flaubert to explain the pesky character of this practical inert. It's very hard for everyone to conceive of the idea of everyone being collectively participatory in a revolutionary act. But something like that is hinted at. And in 1980, when he died, that was just the beginning of the idea that the computer and the World Wide Web could be an instrument for organizing humanity at large. And that idea is not over. It isn't even properly advanced as we try to come to terms with digitalization everywhere. And in some places, there's no digitalization and very little participation in a possible human-wide dialogue. But that idea is, we got it in 68 from our televisions when we saw other groups around in Pakistan and Japan and going out in the street and being infected by the events in France and Czechoslovakia. But it turned out to be a premature or unsuitable moment historically. And we've been living under the repressive counterinsurgency ever since.
Right, sure. I mean, I grew up in New Orleans. I mean, part of my most of all my adolescence, except for a year away to the East Coast, and until I was in my late teens and early 20s. And anyway, in New Orleans, there was a group, Bogalusa, Alabama, Louisiana, at the lunch counters, where the blacks armed themselves. They were called the Deacons of Defense. In a way, and they armed themselves to take on the Klan. And see, the Klan backed down once they saw the guns, right, in a sense, right? And, you had many moments like that in the Black Power movements, right, in a sense. And it seems like Sartre, in a way, to me, again, spoke very much, as you well know, Richard Wright went to work with him, right, who, had some ambivalent relations ultimately obviously to Marxism and communism after being a party member in the States. But the Black Panthers all visited him during the time, and including Cleaver, including Newton, including many of the people that were in the hierarchy there. So again, I guess this question, again, is the arming, if you will, of struggle, armed struggle, still something that speaks at this moment. The old battle, the ballad or the bullet, since we're in an election year. Are these things still on the horizon within the Sartrean, let's say, in the second ethics period? From your perspective, in a way. I mean, is there something known as there is justifiable violence on the side of history, right? On the side of crafting a new history, etc. Can we get around that? I mean, in a sense. Yeah.
Well, the the situation has been complicated. I won't say improved or
Right.
Retreating by the internet. The internet is an amazing tool. We could organize dialogues between factories in South Korea and France, or the possibilities of its use for developing global dialogue and solidarity are amazing. And of course, it would put a huge burden on the communities of translators there are around the world, but we could figure out how to do that. And the possibility of doing that means that we must explore that way of developing our mind collectively, of putting some action in where objective spirit was, and realizing some of these possibilities in what we're doing. I'm not sure that the possibilities of nonviolence have been exhausted.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not against all violence, but I'm not sure that we have. My image of the insurgent group is derived from the Egyptian uprising, in which groups of insurgents with their weapons. What were their weapons? With piles of rocks. And that means that you're gonna take a bullet, but the Arab Spring was an exploration.
Okay. No, yeah. Yeah.
Anyway.
The Arab Spring was an opening. The problem with the Arab Spring, it led to, even a more repressive police state at the end.
Yes.
So this is the problem, about this in some ways. Yeah. Interesting though. Well, yeah. I mean, I was thinking of the film again, The Battle of Algiers. I was thinking about this a lot. I think it's one of the greatest films ever made. I mean, it's the use of really nouveau cinema in very interesting ways, and kind of another path in cinematic history, what he did there, and Pontecorvo, of course. But I thought one thing that was very interesting about the statutory group was the wedding. I don't know if you remember that scene, the wedding that's taking place, between the next generation, and this kind of transmission of the revolution and the hope that is presented in that moment of it, beyond Ali Lapointe's militancy, etc., beyond the bombing, etc. So there are many, many levels here that were really presented during this the FLN uprising. And I think also I don't know if you guys know the work of Weissman, the Israeli forensic architectural person who lives in London. It's very interesting in terms of the way Pontecorvo uses space in cinematic space between the Casbah and the European quarter. It's a very interesting read. If you read Fanon on violence alongside of this, you begin to see perception and how, place and perception, and how this is really working, how the European quarter is down from the Casbah, right? The Arab quarters are completely isolated in many ways. Very little intermixing, very little, moments. And in terms of violence, I mean, this film begins with a torture scene, right? And who initiates the violence in the Casbah is the police. They go on the rogue police officers, right? In a sense. So this is interesting. And, you know, as you remember, Bob, Sartre is referred to by Henri Martin, Colonel Mathieu, in the film. You know, I respect him greatly, but I don't agree with anything he says. He's interviewed during the film, the colonel that's brought in to quell the rebellion in '57, right? To go after Ali Lapointe and other members of the you know, to break up the organization and as Leslie pointed out last week, the tapeworm, you know, that model that was used in terms of the organizational principles. So for me, I mean, this film really gives a lot of illustration to both the pledge, right, in some ways, and towards an integral humanity, in this case, the humanity of the colonized, right, in so many ways, the humanity of the other, you know, that is happening, and in other ways too, about, you know, their movement towards the future. You get a sense in the film that the future really is in the hands of the Algerian people, not in the hands of the colonizers anymore. And I think Sartre really points this out in the preface. And that may be part of this, you know, thing that is very much what you're talking about, this integral humanity as a universal ultimately. But it's coming from below. It's not, you know, a top down, and it's not a reciprocity between the colonizer and the colonized. I think these things are not happening in a way. And I think this is always something that we're fooled by, you know, especially the liberal left becomes fooled by this, you know, that somehow these people, you can really work with them, right? In some ways, I think this is important. And I think I told you, you may have been here, Bob, the story that Tito Gerasi told of being with Sartre in May of '68, that they were walking and they were near the police headquarters. I don't remember what arrondissement it was, but a lot of the radicals were there, you know, and the police were saying, come in, take everything out, whatever you want. You know, typical kind of French attitude during the '68. And the kids would not do it. And Sartre turned to Gerasi and said, it's over. They don't really have the freedom to take power, right? Kind of interesting right there, that moment, you know, Sartre would say it's over, right? This May of '68. Yeah, yeah, to me, you know, just an anecdote, but a revealing one. Yeah, yeah.
The model for the revolutionary group is the Quartier Saint-Jacques
Right.
that was threatened by the king with consequences, who dispatched a company of men to go into the quartier. And the crowd that was already serialized by the guns
Right.
atop the oh Lord, the prison. What was the name of the prison? Oh,
It's in the.
we're now going to, huh?
It's in the book if I can find it. But go ahead, yeah, please. Yeah.
Well, yeah. The point about the guns on top of the prison that were could have leveled the entire quartier has its parallel in our time in the nuclear weapons of all sides that could end humanity by a nuclear exchange after 10 years of nuclear winter. And so the threat to humanity as a whole is pretty convincing. Well, there are enough nuclear weapons to kill us all over and over again. And that makes us want to prolong our existence and turn a deaf ear to people like Biden, who want to reserve the right to eliminate whole sections of humanity, which is what the Israeli war on Palestine is doing. And to be threatened by someone like Netanyahu, who is willing to sacrifice all of us for his ends in that war, should give us inspiration to join together and stop this abolition of humanity, this omnicidal assertion of the right to kill everyone. We're very near a situation where, if it weren't for the restraint of the Iranians, we'd be looking straight down the barrel of a gun aimed at all of us.
Right.
And that should arouse us to take action and say, there's no cause of war that it would justify the ending of history and the ending of this experiment with humanity. So Sartre's position on this is on the side of life in general.
Right, sure.
But it's very hard to imagine how, although the instruments are there, as I say, how humanity could take hold of them, begin to talk with itself about its wishes, and I think Sartre's ultimate aim is discursive. I think if there were a language of words that could substitute for the language of weapons, he would be all for it. And there is the possibility of that in technologies that he died without awakening to their possibility for peace, in my judgment. And so we have a tougher era, much tougher than his,
Yes.
but with many more weapons to use for peace.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I think one question we have to pose then, but again, what you're speaking about, where is the agency in this? Is the agent in some ways the eco-terrorist, in a sense, the one that is able to basically dismantle nuclear sites to bring it to people's attentions? I mean, it just seems that we're beyond, the capital has gone so far ahead of itself. It's so if you will, on this reckless headlong into the abyss that Fanon speaks about, which is a very beautiful passage about Western consciousness, Western man, the colonizer. It just keeps thrusting headlong into the abyssal plane. How did one put a stop to that without the counter violence that's inflicted, both by the intimidation of fear, of this omnicide, etc., and also by, everyday practices, which are, this is a war against the people that's been going on in neoliberalism. It's a war against people. This is really what's happening. It's not just a war against Palestine, that is the most obvious, the worst of it. But it seems to me that there's been, since Reagan, in many ways, in many nuanced subtleties, etc., are really a war against people, in a way. Again, the question, when you read Sartre, you think of praxis, right? You think of being and doing. This is what it evokes, to the proper name, if you will, right? To put it in, kind of Derridian terms, you're evoked into, want to take action. You want to be able to do something. You want to make change. You want transformation, etc. So who is the militant today? Where should the energies be devoted? And I agree with you. If we were all Bob Stone and Jamie and Beryl, etc., in a room talking about the future of humanity, of course it would be on the dialogical level, right? In a sense. But unfortunately, we don't hear the dialogical level in the likes of, Mr. Gordon, who will be the Kamala Harris, chief of the new Blinken on the scene, or this Hochschild that goes to Lebanon, who's an Israeli citizen, and the people that are in these positions of power. So in some ways, again, I think that I love the ethics involved here, and certainly, when Einstein asks Freud, why war? Right? Einstein's thinking, yes, the universe does not play dice. God does not play dice with the universe. And why can't we live, in this kind of, space and be amongst each other in this both reciprocal, both mediated and immediate spontaneous reciprocity. But at the same time, unfortunately, the system itself is programmed on death, on the death drive, if you want to think about it this way too. I mean, this is again something that we, I think, really have to take into account. And what does Sartre, leave us with? Sartre leave us with in this moment, in terms of the question of agency, subjectivity, and again, the new kind of group infusion that could really do something, right? In a sense, well, how do we build that? And for me, the group infusion, I see signs of a group infusion among the encampments last year, that the youth of the world are coming together in a very different way for the first time in a very long time, right? In a way. And this may have much more teeth than the Occupy Wall Street, which in a way may have been a flyer for the Obama second term, in a way. I mean, I kind of read certainly through those lenses sometimes. But anyway, maybe we really have something here. And I think these issues really start to come up. And my question is always, how do we transmit this, the educational models and all the models of this great thinking? I mean, we had the privilege of living through one of the greatest centuries of thought, the 20th century. I mean, we came in with Bergson, Einstein, Heidegger, Dewey, Georgy Lukács, Jean-Paul Sartre, et cetera, et cetera. We can go through a very long list, and the advances in science. But where are we now, in a sense of, this transmission going on? What will come of it? We see the energy there, but again, it seems to be that we're really at this notion of how do we build, I mean, I like the phrase, the community of care, a new milieu of care, that we have become so much in this culture of neglect, right? This kind of self-satisfied, almost arrogant position, of self-satisfaction. Yeah. So anyway, those are some of the questions I bring to this. And, and then of course, the role, where does violence play? Because, as you say, the violence is really with us every day. You have these, snipers, that are coming, the beauty of the heavens, as Leonard Cohen, speaks about the beauty of the missiles, ironically, and first we'll take Manhattan, then we'll take Berlin, yes, in a sense, we have we're powerless in that regard, unless something's done. So, and the early Green Party, the early, the militants, it's the Petra Kellys in Germany, some of the Green people here, and of course, Latin American revolutionaries who were constantly trying to, turn over things. I mean, how can you not be thinking about violence in Venezuela right now, in a sense, because what's going to happen. How can you not, build to counter this violence that's going on. So yeah, they're warmongers now. Today they're warmongers. That's true. Yeah, they changed very much. Yeah, good point, Phil. Yeah. So again, I think if we're going to talk about the wager, right, in a sense, we should know the stakes on the table and how to, put the chips in where the ante is. First of all, we know the ante to enter the game. The best ante is to come in dialogical honesty and dialogical good faith, to put it in Sartrean terms. But at the same time, what happens when, the other hand is holding the death card, right? The ace of spades that they can always trump something with, or whatever, and how to work with that. So anyway, those are just some, obscure, off the cuff, thoughts here. Yeah.
I have the feeling that we don't really appreciate the power of decision that is available to people. At the end of this essay I was referring to earlier, the final paragraph reads very positively. As it dies, the war leaves man naked and without illusions. He is abandoned now to his own devices, having at last understood that he has only himself to rely on. This is the only good piece of news that thin, ceremonious burst of gunfire brought us the other afternoon. In other words, that we can rise up is and we can because we ought to. The pull of human need makes us think of all the questions of racism and class and scarcity that we face in the world. These are things that, if we set our mind to them, could be solved if humanity collectively decided. And that's the embarrassing positive part of existentialism. It's supposed to be so dour and down and pessimistic. He is pessimistic when the Imperium rises up and squashes all the revolutions, which is done. And we are ready to concede that. But he calls on the United States. Let me read you a passage here that is quite uncanny, if I may. It won't take me a minute. About what has happened to the United States because we introduced nuclear weapons. He says,
"Give them hell, Harry." Right.
Give them hell, Harry. It's what do we remember from that era? It's not the accomplishments of Roosevelt.
Right. That's
it's the Cold War of Truman.
Yeah, the Truman Doctrine.
And we're living out. That's right. We're living out Truman's insight. It says here. Hold on. I'm sorry, I can't find it. I'm going to do it from memory.
Okay.
He says that we're in the hands of the people who brought nuclear weapons to humanity and use them. And he says those folks in the United States have a special responsibility. Oppenheimer was so devastated that we didn't use our nuclear monopoly to not use it, to blow up some little island someplace and demonstrate its power. If the United States had responded to its possession of a nuclear monopoly, it would have altered everything. The vision of Oppenheimer was possible. And there are essays in L'État moderne on that theme. And the existentialists realized that there was a conscience operating in the United States, and that it could have arisen and stopped this Cold War that we're still in. And Russia doesn't want to play. That's no fair. You have to be an enemy, Russia. That's what we're telling them. We're assigning them the role of enemy. And if they do play that role, then we know how to handle that. And it justifies the military-industrial complex. It's the job of every government in the United States to recycle that enemy figure and make sure that its justificatory power keeps the use of our taxes for war flowing.
Right. I think one of the very prescient remarks made tonight is how cautious and real and actually civilized Iran has been during this period right now. This is a very, very crucial moment, and you've got to give it to this group of people and to Nasrallah too, to Hezbollah, in a sense, that this has been a very recent, cautious, and actually thinking of global, as you said, global omnicide in many ways. Yeah. So this is very important to keep in mind here, because that's going to be the bogeyman. You know, everybody's a proxy of Iran that makes trouble in the Middle East, right? You know, Hamas is their little proxy. Hezbollah is their proxy. The Yemenis are their proxy. The Houthis are their proxy, right, etc. Who knows what else? We'll find proxies of China, of course, in Africa. We're going to find all this, but this is the way it's worked for a very long time, in a sense. And again, the question is, you know, how is it taken down? Because it's not going to go away. We know that. I mean, you know, all this stuff that we're, you know, I may be hopeful of the younger generation rising up, but it's probably only about 8 to 10% of that generation that's really speaking this way. It does not really represent a majority or quote unquote something that would be, you know, a tax revolt, for example. Just think if people stop paying taxes. We're only paid 50%, and we will not pay taxes unless it goes to healthcare and education. Dismantle the military-industrial complex, or just keep enough to defend us in terms of, you know, some crazy, you know, nuclear attack or whatever. You know, why do we need all these things everywhere? Yeah. In a sense, and in a way, I think what you're speaking to here, Bob, in some ways, is the Chinese. You know, at least they go in there building infrastructure. They're not perfect. It's not a perfect system by any means, but at least they go in with you know, the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're really trying to say, we're not here to enslave you. We're to help you. We want influence. Nobody's stupid on this. Of course they want influence and they want something, but at the same time, they're not going in there to impoverish them. You know, one of the best books, in my opinion, written about globalization was The Globalization of Poverty by a man who heads up some research thing here, conspiratorial guy, Michel Chourkowski, I think is his name. It's a very good book about how countries, especially in Latin America, after the Chicago boys took over, become indebted, enslaved to debt. There's no possibility of real development, you know, and real dialogue. So of course you're going to get, you know, armed groups. Of course, I mean, who cannot support the FARC in Colombia at a certain point that are basically teaching the cocoa workers how exploited they are and helping them out, and then fighting this, the cartels on the other level. Anyway, yeah, George, yeah, we haven't heard from you in a long time. Yeah.
Well, I'm here because Phil is here, so I wanted to hear from him, and also Christina had her hand up. So
Oh, she did. Okay, I missed that. Yes, Christina just has the overhead light on right now. So
I side light.
go ahead, Christine. Yeah, Chris. Yeah, Chris, you had a question? There she is. Okay.
Christine Miller, please speak.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute.
We hear you.
We hear you now.
Okay. No, I didn't have a question. I don't know. I'm just interested in the discussion. Interested.
Okay, no question. Just you're saying you're interested, right? Okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Phil, George asked you what you were, thinking here in terms of, because the global South is a real issue as we go forward, and we're seeing this too. We're seeing another, in Colombia, we're now seeing this play out too, another kind of genocide of indigenous people. What's happening there too. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Bob, in terms of now being a time of, actually point of hope in terms. I mean, the empire is slaughtering people, but they've completely revealed themselves to, the most despicable people on earth. Of course, they haven't revealed themselves so much to people here, but people in the rest of the world are looking at what's going on in Gaza, looking at what the US is doing, bullying various other countries around the world. And it's, I think the empire in its sort of latter days is beginning to is really beginning to reveal itself, and I think that's going to cause problems for it. And you can see, like, in the Middle East, people are, the Israelis, Netanyahu wants to start World War III. People aren't playing along. And it's and so does they want to start World War III in Ukraine, and they'd love to start World War III in China as well. The China, they haven't gotten around to it yet. they're too tied up in Ukraine, in West Asia.
Obviously, the Pentagon is fighting on three major fronts right now: in the South China Sea, right, in Ukraine with NATO, and obviously in the Middle East, and of course with the outposts, the hybrids in certain parts of Africa, and of course in Latin America. So which is not as actively reported as we know. So yeah. It's gone berserk. I guess my only response would be, they revealed themselves in the 1960s. We had Westmoreland, we had Maxwell Taylor, we had General Robert McNamara, we had a whole group of new technical experts that were directly out of Heidegger's Mass Man, the technical expert, the cybernaut, that would come in. McNamara being Ford Motor Company whiz kid, became a killing machine in the Pentagon, this kind of new stuff. I mean, I guess, again, and the question was, yes, there was a generation that not only was the fear of the nuclear war, but also was completely afraid of atomization. They didn't want to be a number, in a way. The Port Huron Statement of '62 with Hayden and what's his name? I'm forgetting his name, but Stanley was part of that too. This was a question of upper white middle class alienation, or in a sense, right? And at the same time, you had the colonial struggles and the Black Power struggles in the United States. So all these things are going on, but still at the same time, counter-revolutionary forces, if you want to narrativize it that way, settled in and had been embedded for a very long period of time. So, I mean, I agree with you about the hope and making that wager, but at the same time, we should be very careful, in a sense, about what's being revealed, because I don't think we've even seen the ugliness in its nakedness yet, to go back to Sartre's beautiful thing, where he was able to phenomenologically render this nakedness, shamelessness of these people, right? In a sense, what this has come to, in a sense. So, and hopefully people are picking up more about this, and I think the real problem is that the fear that's ingrained so deeply leads to almost an apathy that nobody really knows. I mean, I still teach, I teach at several, levels, I mean, if you will, but at the lower level, the lower tier level with university students, sometimes, I mean, there's no historical background. This is part of the problem too, that it's been rendered ahistorical. This kind of discussion, unless the young people are really listening and want to learn, like Tyrese, who comes to these things, to listen, there's very little of this discussion going on, in many ways. So I think this is important for us to recognize going forward. Yeah. But yeah, again, that's just me and my own lived experience, and the every day of still being involved and, with younger people, et cetera. And this is a task. You talk about freedom, responsibility. It's really the task of the intellectual today to, step it up multiple notches, because, the crisis is so imminent. We're in the imminent crisis that needs to have this done on a everyday level. But again, you don't have the institutions behind you anymore. The humanities are being destroyed, in many ways. You have this attack. So I think we should always think this, again, for lack of a better term, these dialectical tensions that exist, right? Where are the possibilities for the determinate negations that can open us up beyond the practical inert? To me, this is the most important concept that Sartre has in this book, in a sense, because we always seem to get back to that, to this practical inert, right? And where's the agency there? Yeah, Bob, if you want to, I'm sorry, like I said, I'm just getting down from the Sierra Madres with a
Permanent negation is good.
It occurs to me that a little bit of Marxism here might help.
Yeah.
That we have the rate of profit is declining because of the organic composition of capital is leaning more toward machines as value producers than humans. And we're getting to the end of that, and the military industrial complex needs government money, tax money, to keep going, and it's getting it, and this is giving rise to government corporate support of capitalism in a direct way, and that's pretty close to what fascism is about.
Yep.
And we're observing, and at the same time, people like Scott Ritter, who's a truth teller, being investigated, and they try to shut him up. He won't shut up, but that's the problem. We're now entering the very first stages of repression that I expect we'll see more of, as the indebtedness of the U.S. and the unviability of its proceeding, even with the government's support of repression going on. You're not going to get out of this crisis until you get out of a debt-dependent capitalism. So, and they're not going to do that. So they need scapegoats, and we're standing right in their way. And
Yes.
And the people of the world are too, with all their naked needs, and we need to be ready to get ourselves organized to defend humanity and to figure out other ways of meeting our needs together besides markets.
Right. No, I like that. Yeah, I mean, to think beyond the market economy and to build an anticipatory defense, if you will, against the I mean, it's not creeping; it's here. I mean, we don't really have a name for it at this point. Fascism may be too archaic in some ways. I mean, it shows that signs, but maybe we need another kind of I know Bertram Gross wrote a good book called Friendly Fascism about the United States in the 80s. But it's much worse than that, at this point.
Techno-feudalism.
Yeah,
Techno-feudalism is Varoufakis. Yeah, it's
yeah.
Yanni's.
I just posted an article to you guys about by Vijay Prasad talking about the closeness between liberalism and fascism, and like we were examining back when we were talking about Homo datum. And actually it's interesting because I posted it on Facebook and Facebook took it down immediately.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, good. Yeah. Speaking of Homo datum, just a bit of advertising for the Institute for Radical Imagination. Arto and I are starting a new podcast called On the Line. So we're going to try to develop new species being in Homo datum, that we have proceeded from Homo economicus now to this new concept of Homo datum. So we hope to have guests and all of that, but Arto and I will riff it's kind of spontaneously for the first session. So it'll be a new podcast called On the Line. And I found a great jazz piece by George Russell with Eric Dolphy doing Round Midnight to be our opening song, because I was asked by someone, my love of jazz, what are the 10 best renditions of Round Midnight? So I started to think about this, and I remembered this wonderful piece that hardly anybody knows by George Russell with Eric Dolphy, done back in 1961. Pretty amazing, stuff. So anyway, we're going to use that as the theme for the show, because we figure midnight is when all the defenses are down, and that's where thought really comes. And the dream or the unconscious is really playing in a different way. So anyway, we're going to do that. So yeah, Homo datum is an interesting concept. Yeah. So anyway, okay. Well, I mean, I know it's getting late. I mean, I don't want to keep everybody. I certainly can go on, and as you know, enjoy this. So I want to really thank Bob again. You really opened up some really good questions for us going forward. Like a good philosopher, you asked the right questions at the right time and came in with the right concepts in terms of the ethical dimension of Sartre's thought, etc. That this was just not, someone that's just writing descriptive phenomenology very well, right? That there was another dimension to this, and not only critical phenomenology or dialectic, that there was something underlying this, and pointing out where we sort of started with the critique is that need is there. That I think I did the diagram of desire and live lack as the beginning, the live lack in the middle, and need on the other side, and you're always in this position of demand on one side Yeah, I mean, this was really good. I thought it really synthesized a lot of the stuff we were doing. And thank you again, Bob, for offering both your time and your expertise, your knowledge, and obviously your very commitment to this moment. And and I agree with you. It's a suicidal mission, right? In a sense, this is in a way, capital's way of just telling us that once again, we don't matter. We're built on the death drive, etc. So yeah, which is very, very, very important to keep in mind, and that really the question of universal humanity is always, on the agenda, or what Sartre called integral humanity as an ethical position in many ways. So, and it opens up, at least for me in my own thinking, Heidegger's, question about technology, that ultimately it will open up the possibility and its greatest danger, its liberatory potential. I think you hinted at that tonight, in a good way too, the optimism with the internet, and technology could have for us. Unfortunately, right now, it's been used as a tool to keep a lot down, even though we can watch Scott Ritter being arrested and then coming out and saying, I'm not intimidated. Yeah, they were very polite, the FBI. You got to like Scott Ritter. It's kind of like Freud when they asked him about the Gestapo. I highly recommend them to anyone, when they got passage across Germany into France. But yeah, but tonight's session, very, very good and from my perspective, in terms of opening up some very questions as we go forward. So on the reading agenda, and I'll put this out, we would go to organization. I mean, you'll have a lot of time to think about this. I don't know about next week. I'll let you know. I mean, I'm just very busy with getting things organized for the upcoming semester. I'm doing a new course on radical political thought, so I'm trying to think about how to compress a lot of material into 14 weeks, a 14-week seminar. But anyway, if I can, I'll do it next week. But let's target the infamous day, September 11th, and we'll pay our respects to Salvador Allende, right? And the failure of democratic socialism. They weren't armed to the T. And of course 9/11. For some people that saw that as a turning point. It may have been a major turning point, not as much as we really realize at this point. Again, I think 9/11, set up something that, like Benjamin Netanyahu, and the Israeli right in a very different way. I think 9/11 really contributed to this moment in Israel. Not that they were ever, angels, but this intensified very much this outright blank check. Israel at all costs, right? Yeah, and that axis again, yeah, but it was always there. Yeah. So okay.
Yeah, I was living next door.
What's that? Yeah. What, Phil?
Oh, I said I was living next door to a building full of ex-IDF soldiers, where they would come to New York to kind of decompress. And they were all up on the roof as the Twin Towers were coming down, celebrating, actually literally cracking the champagne, and telling us now we're gonna rule now.
Right. Yep. Yeah, I believe
They
it.
were celebrating.
I believe it.
Question,
Yes,
Michael.
Yes.
I joined you at 4:30 my time. Was that before or after you started?
We started 6:30 Eastern Standard Time.
I think
Eastern
that
Daylight Time. I'm sorry, Eastern Daylight. Yeah.
I think that corresponds to my time here, which is Mexico time, but I think it is also Chicago time.
Okay.
So if I join you 4:30 again next week, will that be more or less when you start?
If you're on Central Daylight Time, you would join us at 5:30. We begin at 6:30 Eastern time. Yeah.
Got it. Okay, thank
And
you.
I'm going to try my best to do it next week. I was thinking of giving you guys a break, but maybe I'll have enough energy to, pull it together for next week, and we'll do the organization, right, section here, and going into institutions, so that and then we would go September 11th after that, because it's Labor Day week after that, and I'm very busy that week. It's not a great week for me, but we can go. So we would maybe meet on August 28th, I think it would be, and then again on September the 11th after that. So I'll put out the schedule. It'll be on the email chain. Yeah.
But to simplify it at all is right now it's 6:30 in New York. Michael's good for
That's the opening time. It's 9:20.
But
Right
Mike,
now. It's probably 8:20 for Bob. For Beryl, it's in the morning. I guess it's I spoke to
Getting on to
Miguel
11:30, I
Lepata
think,
this
now.
morning. He said to say hello, and he's going to London for a while, but he's going to be back and forth to Australia. My friend Miguel, who you met,
Yeah,
Justin
yeah.
Clemens is a good friend. There. So yeah. And
Yeah,
yeah.
we're actually in correspondence at the moment.
What is it, 10:30 for you now? About 10:30 or 10:20?
11:22.
11:20. Wow.
on the hour. Michael's good for 3 hours. Michael's
That's minimal.
Josh is there
That's
to
minimal, man. Yeah.
Josh
Yeah.
let you in for 3 hours.
I
That's
know. I haven't even had a nightly Talisker or anything.
doesn't matter. We got 3 hours to hook up with you. And
Right. There you go. There you go. Yeah. I quit smoking, so I hopefully don't end up like Sartre early. Yeah, I quit smoking. I used to love to smoke. I love the way he held the cigarette. I always liked that about him, with Juliet Greco at the table, who I have great admiration for. And, I love that period through the films too, as much. And I love it through the love of jazz he had too. There's a famous story on one of the jazz liner notes in a Charlie Parker album that Sartre heard Charlie Parker in Paris, and he goes up to him and said, "I really enjoyed your playing, Mr. Parker." And he turns to Sartre and he says, "I've enjoyed your playing too, Mr. Sartre." That's really kind of sums it up in some senses in a good way. So anyway, no, we're in the presence, and Bob knows this, of really, a remarkable individual on the planet, and someone who has, again, I think been, canceled, to put it in kind of vernacular terms, by the institutions because of the rigor of the thought and what it really implies for us in terms of the level of responsibility we need to have to confront this. It's not easy. It's much easier to play little word games with Dada and, I'm talking Derrida and others, we used to call him Dada, out of the Dadaist movement. But anyway, in some ways, this institutionalization of knowledge, that's going on, that he was very much against this, really in a sense. He understood the institutions, but again, this was an outsider who was free to think. Right? In a sense, he was not dependent upon a tenure track job. He was not dependent on institutional practices. He had this thing. And, as Bob knows, some of his heroes, he loved detective novels. He liked the American way, in a way, he had an affection, a very strong affection for the Americans, right? In a sense. He wrote the Freud scenario for John Huston. Huston says he never stopped talking. That's what he said about Sartre. And Sartre said, John Huston's a stupid man. So this is the way they used to get along back in the day, right? Anyway, yeah. And we had a great loss this week. Gina Rowlands was a great actress. I mean, she was really a great actress, in a way, out of that period, Cassavetes, and then they came out of this period, in a way, out of the film noir and out of this scene, but yeah, major work, in my opinion. Yeah. So that was sad, from Woman Under the Influence to Gloria. She could play so many roles. Okay, so I'll do my best for next week. Just check the emails. I'll see how it's going. And thank you so much again, Bob. This was
Thank
great.
you.
Open up the discussion. Thanks very much. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
See you soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Good night. Good night. Thank you.